Welcome back. You've just graduated from Liberty, I think, if I remember.
Right.
And you're continuing on to graduate school there? I think that may have changed. I don't know.
It's kind of up in the air. We'll see. Maybe sometime next year. We will see. We will see.
And our relationship with Lacroix actually started back a couple years ago when he came to the Lodge of the Fishermen, as Common Grounds Cafe did a Martin Luther King commemoration time. And some of you were there. Lacroix was one of the performers that day, and it's amazing to see not only Lacroix but several of the people that were there that day have risen. You know, not only had we had the old generation of civil rights leaders here in Lynchburg. We had Owen Cardwell, and we had Carl Hutcherson, and the mayor and others. But we had people that now are leading our Black Lives Matter protests and things locally that were there that have moved on to help a lot of the things that are going on right now in our city. So I just think back to that night and how important, you know, these young college kids were then, and now I see them now and I see what they're doing, and I'm just amazed. Lacroix was one of them. He's among these people that were performing that night, goes on to do Freedom School, goes on to do other things at the Liberty campus. He's an amazing spoken word artist, and he's a digital media artist as well. So he does all sorts of amazing artistic things, but he's also a Black man who comes from Williamsburg, Virginia. I just can't think of something that's more riveting than the intersection between first colonies here in Virginia and then people of color that came as the enslaved in this continent, and then Lacroix growing up. And I saw Lacroix recently on Facebook. I don't know if you all saw that, with Nick George from The Listening, and he was doing an interview with Lacroix. Lacroix shared one of just these poignant, beautiful pieces, and I would love if he did the piece, but I'm not going to make him do that because it was pretty outstanding. But then I wanted Lacroix to kind of share his story. Lacroix, how would you like to start? So I'm going to just kind of.
All right, it's cool. It's cool. Actually, I don't mind doing the piece at all. I want to kind of do the piece just to kind of set the mood and set the tone, because like there's a lot to, especially with everything that's happened over the last week alone, it's a lot to unpack. So to kind of, you're gonna have to ease into this thing. It's one of those things you can't just dive off the deep end, you know. But okay. So for those who don't know, hi, my name is Lacroix. You know, let's just dive in, you know. This piece, I did it with with The Listening. They had a virtual open mic of maybe a few days ago. And this piece is entitled Diaspora. I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia. And maybe about 50 miles and 400 years ago, the first slave was treated like a car, flipped like a house, sold like property, probably still seasick from the boat rocking, and on the auction block looking at a sea of people that didn't see him as people. But he told me not to be afraid. Like, I'm not afraid of you judging me. And I'm too big to fit in your noose and hang from your bigotry. See, I'm the bigotry, planted like Alex Haley's roots by the brook, producing the good fruit. And Tupac once told me, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. And I am the greatest easel of art ever painted blank, the cleanest slate of blood ever seen vivid, like the living colors and living waters that rush through me like mighty rivers, from LA to Mississippi, Beverly Hills to the boondocks. I am the walking paradox, cresting like a wave meant to crash. So enough drifting, because these reality checks are meant to be cash. And who would have thought? Who would have thought that shattered bodies removed from their homeland could produce a patchwork mosaic so beautiful that it leaves the world puzzled? Beauty from brokenness should be our tagline. I wonder if as he stood on that auction block, if his stagger turned to swagger, a slight tilt in the shoulders that rock and roll like deep blues, like the ocean of fear and doubt he just crossed, skin-shaded baritone, bearing tones of Negro spirituals, and backbone stronger than church pews. I wonder if he knew that his steps would be traced from reggaeton to bachata. How do you think the reds on your flag got so vibrant? How do you think the blues got so deep? We are the ones that are the real stars, waving freely in the greatest symbol of freedom, yet the greatest oxymoron that the world has ever seen. I wonder I wonder if, as he worked in the fields, if he heard the plans of future entrepreneurs, knowing that one day he would live through their labor, as if he knew that no matter how black he was, Wall Street was never too far, even when the odds were never in his favor, as if he was hungry for this game to end. As hot as it was outside, I wondered if he heard me earning my degree, as if I was his wildest daydream, from lawyers upholding the law and doctors reading vital signs, well-accomplished verbiage, sharper than fresh-cut hairlines. See, he may have not been able to pronounce diaspora, but he knew he wasn't home. And I wonder if he knew that some of his children would be killed in the street before they had a chance to live, that some of them would be buried in coffins no bigger than toy boxes. Yes, still treated like a product of the system, like a serial number, waiting to be counted and scanned. But I wonder if he knew that even at his lowest point, he would still overcome. Thank you. So, yeah, that was Diaspora. And for those who don't know, Diaspora, in layman's terms, means that you've been separated from your original homeland, typically in a forced manner. The African diaspora is one of the biggest amongst like world history, because it's not just Africans in America. You have, North and South America. You have Africans that were scattered to Asia, to Europe. Pretty much every corner of the globe, Africans have been separated mostly due to colonization. So that's one thing that like really hits hard. And one thing I asked myself, because in Williamsburg, Virginia, about 40 minutes down the road, depending on traffic, you have Hampton, Virginia. And Hampton in 1619, that was where the first slave was traded. For those who may not know, there's a major historically black college called Hampton University. They make a lot of major moves. They're one of the most prestigious HBCUs in the country. And from what I know, they still have like a memorial, like a spot to where the first slaves arrived on the shores of Virginia, or would be Virginia at the time. And they use that as a moment to recognize, look how far we've come, but we still have a long way to go. The history around here is really heavy, because almost everywhere you look, you're constantly reminded that, one, this country wasn't built for you. You're constantly reminded that, two, it's not that it wasn't built for you. If everything went according to plan, you would still be property, at best. I think it's something that is crazy, because even in elementary school, there's to kind of show like how things have changed and things like that. There's a street in colonial Williamsburg called Duke of Gloucester Street. Back in the day, they actually used to call it Dog Street, because it was during the 60s and 70s, it was illegal for an African-American person to walk down that street. Like, if you were seen on that street, you could be killed. And just yesterday, from what I know, they had a protest on that street, like where protesters from across many different races, ethnicities, cultures, faiths, whatever, or walking down that street in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And that's something that really hit me. I wasn't there because I had to be at work and I was mad, but it was a struggle. But it was something that really shifted everything, because typically Williamsburg, a lot of things happen, but Williamsburg is it's a heavy retirement community, so there's a lot of old money around here. What happens is you get a lot of people that, they grew up in, they remember Jim Crow, they grew up in all that stuff. Virginia was subliminally ground zero for a lot of things. The hardest thing for me to watch was, my mom and dad, both of them being pastors, watch how a lot of church folks treated them as Black pastors in this city, which is something you don't see a lot of. And not only Black pastors in the city, but active Black pastors in the city. So that's something that kind of shapes your perspective growing up. But Duke of Gloucester Street, Dog Street, it's right there in the heart of colonial Williamsburg. And to think that, one day, if I was living in the 60s, thinking that one day there's going to be a protest to march through this street and people will listen. And I think that's another thing that's different about the events that have happened. It's the fact that It's not just America. Like to see the world stand in solidarity. Kind of going back to the whole idea of the diaspora, to see European countries that were partially responsible for the diaspora of African people stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and not just be like a social media post. I'm talking thousands of people taken to the streets. That right there, that right there is crazy. I saw a post the other day. It was kind of funny. Like it was funny, but it also kind of brought depth to the situation. Somebody was like, it took the entire Black community, the LGBTQ community, pretty much every group of people of color, white people standing up as allies, Elmo, Batman, and a few other people just to get a cop to be charged with second-degree murder. It's like it's crazy. It sounds like something out of a terrible movie. I promise you. It sounds like something out of like a weird plotted movie. But like if I told you, if you didn't see it, you wouldn't believe me. You know what I'm saying? Also, they were like, yeah, it took Batman, Elmo, Anonymous coming out of hiding just to get a charge. And when I talk to my friends about like things like white privilege, and I've had people come up to me and say, well, Black people kill Black people all the time. There's Black on Black crime. And I'm like, the sad thing about that is the reason why you don't see a lot of, protests in a lot of Black neighborhoods, which there are, but the reason why you don't hear a lot about them is because at the end of the day, if a Black person kills a Black person, they're tried to the fullest extent of the law. They're arrested, they're tried in the court, and they're thrown in jail. And the key is typically thrown away with them. And I had to tell people that, and I'm like, and you see that, but then a cop can kill somebody on camera, Black or white, because there's been a lot, because Black Lives Matter has also protested against police brutality against white people and other people of color across the board. And that's one misunderstanding a lot of people get, that Black Lives Matter is just for Black people. No, everybody, I believe it was Fannie Lou Hamer that said, until everybody's free, nobody's free. So that's one thing too, because the sad thing is there's been a case that's kind of resurfaced. A man by the name of Tony Timpa. He was killed in 2016, almost in the same manner that George Floyd was murdered with. The only difference is there weren't bystanders to record it, but the body cameras caught the whole scene. And he was a white male, but they were on his neck and he suffocated. The precinct swept it under the rug. And people try to use that to say, well, where was the Black Lives Matter movement then? The Black Lives Matter movement, let's just remember, this is 2016. We also had Philando Castile that we were protesting and fighting for. We also had Alton Sterling, and I believe not too long after that, Sandra Bland, amongst others. And plus, and it was sad that his case got swept under the rug because at the end of the day, the only people that was taken to the streets was, the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's so crazy. But I think the thing is, like, when it comes to white privilege, I think that the hardest thing is when people don't realize how serious this is. Like, for example, just last night, in Birmingham, I believe it was Birmingham, there were workers. There was a video that surfaced on Twitter of workers that were being evacuated from a Walmart because the KKK came through and they were threatening the city. They came through threatening to kill Black people and other people of color just on sight. And it didn't make the news. It's so sad, but because if it wasn't for that tweet and people started sharing it and people started reporting on it on Twitter, and I was like, whoa, like, wait a minute. And I'm like, the fact that they're not considered a terrorist group at this point is beyond me, but we're not ready for that conversation yet. We'll get there. We'll get there. But that's the kind of things that you deal with. I think one of the hardest things, especially after the death of Ahmaud Arbery, me, my younger brothers, we're all athletes. We all, work out, and every now and then, we go and run on the block. The hardest thing is when I have to say my younger brother's going out for a run. I always have to make sure I look him in the eye to say, all right, cool. Just let me know when you get back, because there's a chance, it's that fleeting thought, like, what if he doesn't come back? Because you don't know. We live in a predominantly white neighborhood. And I've gone on runs times and I've gotten people peering through their blinds. You know, I've caught people looking out their window like, yo, who is this guy running? There's been a couple times I've had to wear, you know, some Liberty stuff just so people will be like, oh, okay. Like it's things that you don't, it's a lot of things that are go unsaid and go unseen. I think when people think of racism, they think of somebody shouting the N-word and a bunch of people marching through the streets with you know, with the pitchforks and stuff like Charlottesville. When you see stuff like that, okay, it's easier to see and it's kind of easier to point out. Some people still didn't point it out anyway, but that's besides the point. The hardest thing is when it's the little things that you know, like, you know, that like there was a silver lining in everything. Like, there's people in my neighborhood that go running all the time, but like you know, you see somebody come all the way from the back of their house to just to look at you, and then they go back and realize, okay, he's cool. You know, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just going on a run. You're just making yourself better, getting fit like anybody else would. You know, I think the hardest thing is when, like, I think a couple nights ago, my first younger brother, Sammy, he's driving now. The hardest thing is when my mom, him and my mom went to the grocery store, and he was saying that my mom went with them just because, like, both of them were legitimately afraid because they don't know what's going to happen. Even when me and my other two younger brothers are riding in the car, we all like are really careful about what we do and how we conduct ourselves because we're three Black men rolling together in a car. It like it's so, and it's something that it's so overtly subliminal, and you run into it, and it's the fact that, you know, people, there's people that don't see it, and then there's people that refuse to see it. There was a picture that surfaced it was like on Twitter, Facebook. I think I had seen it like maybe once or twice on Instagram. Essentially, there was this group of, you know, white kids, Caucasian kids. They were chilling at like an outdoor bar, you know, chilling, just eating lunch. Meanwhile, there's a protest on the street right next to them. And it's like, how oblivious can you be? You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's outside, like literally the bar's right here and the street is right here. There's people just walking down, yelling, like screaming and everything, just marching, you know, for like civil rights and all this stuff. And then these kids, they're just sitting there, just chilling. And I'm like, do you not realize how serious this is? And I think, and that right there is something that we're dealing with now. I forget who said it, but I remember hearing this. We have to realize that 85% of America's history, Black people, in many cases specifically Black people, but as well as other people of color, have either been enslaved, discriminated against, segregated, you know, over policed, you name it. For 85% of America's history, it was lawful. Not just like, because that stuff is still kind of going on, but it was lawful to do these practices. You know, like lynching in America, it wasn't considered a hate crime until last February in 2019. That's crazy, right? And even then, there's silver linings to where people are still lynching Black people and people of color, and they're still using silver linings to kind of get out scot-free. And and it's like, wow, that's how you feel. So that's something that you're constantly reminded of, something that you're constantly made aware of. It's the fleeting thought that, kind of bringing things back to Ahmaud Arbery, for example, it's the thought that, you know, hadn't that video surfaced, those men would have walked away scot-free. Because he died in February. We didn't find out about it until March because the video evidence was covered up. You take cases like Breonna Taylor, how unmarked, not in uniform cops barged into the wrong house without a warrant and started shooting at her boyfriend. She gets killed and her boyfriend gets charged with murder. You know, when you start seeing things like that, and then of course, with the most recent example of George Floyd, you know, how many times, it's not even just like how many times does this have to happen. It's like the cop is clearly breaking protocol or anything that makes any logical sense. He can't resist you. He's on his face and he still dies, you know? And then I think the biggest oxymoron, I think the biggest thing that vexes me the most is when people use the all lives matter thing. People go like, well, no, all lives matter. And they do. All lives do matter. But I would like to ask a question to, you know, those that would use this hashtag. Where was all lives matter when Parkland High School was shot up? Notice how when a school shooting happens or something that affects everybody, all lives matter is really quiet until somebody says Black Lives Matter. I'd ask, there's a slave trade happening in Libya. Libya being a country that was overthrown by the United States because they killed Muammar Gaddafi because he was trying to reinstate pretty much the gold standard behind currency, which would have put Africa, which would have taken a lot of impoverished nations and impoverished countries out of poverty. And it would have made Africa not really depend on the American dollar. America kills Muammar Gaddafi and sets in a new dictator government in Libya. And there's a slave trade happening over there right now. But All Lives Matter is very quiet. All Lives Matter has yet to speak on human trafficking. You know, All Lives Matter has yet to speak on governmental corruption that affects people across all race, genders, faith, ethnicities, and things like that. All Lives Matter only seems to come out when somebody says Black Lives Matter. And that right there is like it's like, wow, that's how you really feel, you know? Like, for example, when the pipeline was being built out west, Black Lives Matter stood in solidarity with the Native American community out west. They were protesting that the pipeline not be built straight through somebody's home. All Lives Matter was nowhere to be seen. So when people say that, it's like you're trying to cover it up. And I think a lot of people mistake peace for quiet. I think that's another thing that people try to do. They try to use other things to quiet people, but it's like you mistake quiet for peace and peace for quiet, and they're very different things. But the hardest thing is that when you grow up, especially growing up Black, is that you're given two talks. You're given the birds and the bees, and you're giving the talk about, you know, oh yeah, you're Black, and this is what you should and shouldn't do. This is how you conduct yourself. This is like how you stay alive, you know. I think in the rabbit hole goes on, but I think the hardest thing is watching, I think, and especially with the coronavirus and everything going on, I think that's probably the major thing that makes this movement different, because you can't look at sports and kind of distract yourself. There's nothing else going on. You've watched everything on Netflix and Hulu already. You've already seen everything. So, but now you can't look away. It's to the point to where people are trying to find distractions at this point. For example, notice how there's a lot of people that pay more attention to the riots and looting and not the reason for them. Which, by the way, a lot of those riots are staged by undercover cops and really individuals that do not represent the Black Lives Matter movement or any peaceful protest. And that's been caught on camera and documented and proven. I've had friends that there was a protest down in Virginia Beach. I've had friends that went down there, and the story is still the same. Everything was peaceful. Like, you know, things were going well. People weren't rioting. People weren't causing a ruckus. Everything was cool. People just marched through the streets. I think it was close to 1,000 plus people that were there. People just marching through the streets. Suddenly one of the cops or somebody fired rubber bullets into the crowd. And then, they fired rubber bullets into the crowd and started throwing tear gas, and the crowd had to disperse. And it's like, why is it that, you know, everybody gets that first, like, but the thing is, like, you're telling me everybody gets that First Amendment right until they're Black, right? Because you telling me you got a group, and not just that, or if you stand with Black people as well. because you see that happen, unarmed, peaceful protest. But not even 3 weeks ago, we had people with AR-15s and rocket launchers standing in front of the state capitol of Michigan because they wanted to get haircuts. And the National Guard wasn't deployed. There was no tear gas fired. There was no countermeasure, you know, to say like, hey, there's people on the steps of a federal building with guns. In any other context, that's a problem. But there was no action taken. So when it comes to the rioting and how angry people are, this is one of the reasons why people are so like fed up, because they see the silver lining all the time. When you're Black, you're constantly reminded of like, oh yeah, like be careful when you wear a hoodie in public, because somebody somewhere is going to see you as a threat, even if you're not doing anything. It doesn't matter what color you wear. It doesn't matter how good your grades are. It doesn't matter how much of a model citizen you can be. You know, in that moment, you're Black, and that's reason enough to shoot for some people. I've had to deal with it a lot, but I think the biggest thing, I'm say this in closing, the hardest thing to watch is when I see a lot of my church brothers and sisters that are eerily silent when these things happen. They're the first ones to say Jesus died for everybody, but when it comes to standing up for people that really do have it rough in this country, they're eerily silent. You know, I've had people, they've used this to talk about, well, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement supports abortion, you know, so, and that right there, that's genocide. And they try to spin the whole thing. I'm like, well, first off, are we going to talk about when Black mothers, pregnant mothers were being lynched? You know, are we going to talk about that? Because they went unnamed, and those numbers number in almost the millions. Nobody wants to talk about that on the first tip. Secondly, like at the end of the day, when people try to use, like I've seen like Christians really try to flip this, and I'm like, y'all do realize y'all do realize that, you know, Jesus died for Black lives too, right? Like like, am I the only one that's missing this? I've seen Christians do nothing but, you know, they'll quote Martin Luther King because he was a reverend, right? But at the end of the day, Martin Luther King was also anti-capitalist and supported the idea of reparations to Black people. And nobody talks about that. So I think that's something that hits the hardest, when the church stands silent, but then wonders why nobody takes it seriously. That's one thing. Also, I promise this is the last thing. I promise. There's one last thing. I want to draw attention to one last thing, and I say this kind of as a warning, and also to let everybody know to be careful. Notice how silent the NRA is right now. Notice how quiet they are right now. I bring that up to say this. Notice how people are talking about, like, have been spreading rumors of like a second civil war, like a race war or something like that. People are going around saying, arm yourselves, buy yourself a gun and stuff like that. One thing I've learned is that every war has a profiteer. Every war has a dealer, whether you're dealing to one side or both sides. Notice how quiet they are right now, because if things flare up, and God forbid shots are actually fired and some type of race war or something like that were to start, at the end of the day, like major businesses and corporations, they don't care who wins. The more guns in people's hands is more money in their pockets. And that is an even bigger beast on the back end of things. And that's also to show how people also profit from racism. That and like the industrial prison complex, things like that. But people know that with everything that's going on, somebody in the back is also profiting from this. The more guns in people's hands, whether that be the cops, white supremacists, or looters, that's more money in their pockets. And so I just want you to take notice how quiet they are about everything. So But with everything that's going on, the hardest thing sometimes is finding God in all this. It's easy to look outside and say, "Yo, it's chaos out there." For me, it's been tough. I'm not gonna lie, because it's like, yo, like how many times does this have to happen? But I think the thing that gave me hope was seeing the world rally around this cause, seeing world leaders speak up on this cause, and it's at the point to where it's like you can't ignore this anymore, and that's just that. So I say everything to say, listen, like, I love all of you. Like, you really, thank you for having me. Like, I really appreciate it. I just kind of vented a little bit because it's been an interesting experience. It's crazy to leave the house and pray that you come back and all you're doing is going to work or going to get gas, you know? So yeah, that's all I got to say.
Thank you so much, Lacroy. Man, I think a lot of us are just in this position of where we got to listen. I mean, and Lacroy, to have you come and be able to share, or just raw. I love it. Oh, thank you so much for just, thank you for being present with us and patient, and letting us hear those deeper things that you're feeling. Thank you. Things that perhaps we don't see, we don't know, and myself included. I mean, I'm a white Indian. I mean, it's clear there's very brown Indians, indigenous Indians, and they can't get away with what I can get away with. And so it's I'm in a place of extreme privilege, and I know it in this country. Thank you so much for that. For
Thank
being
you,
so
Lacroy.
on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Come back and see us soon.
Yeah,
Oh, of course.
I was gonna. I would open this up to question, but my fear is that it'll just go, and so I'm gonna. But if anyone wants to give some love and praise to Lacroy, please do. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll give some time for that. We'll hold questions back. Well, maybe in an email or something. I see virtual applause. Yeah, there you go. That was it. Thank you, guys. Thank you. There's so much that we need to learn as a community, and I feel honored. Thank you, Lacroy, for bringing this to us today, and for standing up and not being quiet. When I saw Sunday night was a very trying time here in Lynchburg, because we had emotions running pretty high at Fifth and Federal, but and then a white militia there, which was just an amazing thing that we have. And I say white militia because there are no, it's what it is. It's a militia of white people, but present on place, and mostly black people at that point. Most of the protesters were African American. The whites had gone home on that side. And then when I saw the protest at Liberty on Monday night, and again, 3/4 African American, mostly students, connected with Liberty in some way, but not a huge white presence. You would think there'd be an overwhelming mixed crowd there to support those people who are hurting most. But I think a lot of folks are afraid to do it. And I tell you, it's time to see a change among Christian white folks when it comes to supporting change. My gosh, I mean, it's simple things, and I just don't see. I thank you for sharing. That was great to hear it from you. Thank you very much.